Here, my fellow Americans, is the case for supporting and voting for Evan McMullin for President of the United States on November 8th. From the Cantanucci 04 diaries at Red State. Here's part one. It's in two parts, so two segments in this video. Rejecting both the binary choice argument and its evil twin, the strategic voting argument. Now, for a long time now, I've been told by Trump supporters that not voting for president is the same thing as voting for Hillary, which is nonsensical. Well, now that we have an independent candidate running, an independent and actual conservative candidate running in Evan McMullin, well, they can no longer say that. Instead, they now say that a vote for Evan McMullin is a vote for Hillary, which is even more nonsensical. It's because it's the same old binary choice argument they've used to justify voting for Trump from the start. That argument can be turned on its head because one can also say a vote for Trump is a vote for Hillary, since it's taking votes away from the one candidate in the race who's actually conservative, Evan McMullin. And at this point, his winning the election is just about as likely as Trump winning, which is close to non-existent. I tried that on pointing that out to a Trump supporter recently. I said, voting for Trump, a vote for Trump is a vote for Hillary, because Trump can't win. Now, of course, that argument, I forget which Trump supporter it was, but she said, oh, that's absurd. Oh, you mean like what you keep claiming that, well, if you vote for anybody but Trump, it's a vote for Hillary? Oh, really? See, that's how that's a teaching method. For those of you, my grandmother was a teacher on my maternal grandmother, and my aunt was a teacher, and my daughter is a teacher. That is a teaching method. Putting it in terms that your student can understand, especially an unwilling student who needs to learn their lessons. Now, even if the race was closer, that would be beside the point. I invite you to imagine with me a scenario where every conservative in the country votes for Evan McMullin, either by write-in, as I'm going to do, or by a regular vote in the states where he ends up on the ballot. Now, Trumplicans will say that's unrealistic because many people don't even know who he is at this point. But tell me, I want you to explain this to me. How realistic is it to ask conservatives who voted for someone other than Trump in the primaries to vote for a GOP nominee who represents everything they've been fighting against for decades, and who is so incompetent that every time Hillary or fate has handed him a layup, low-hanging fruit, he takes the ball, throws it into the audience, and takes out a gun and shoots himself in the head? I mean, we've long been past the point where anyone can credibly describe realistic scenarios in this election. For anything but a Hillary Clinton victory, that is. That ended the second the GOP nominated a know-nothing reality TV show host with no qualifications whatsoever to be president. So when Trumplicans try to tell us never Trump, aka true, actual conservatives, that we're living in some fantasy world by voting for Evan McMullin, I say I agree, but it's not just us. We're all living in an alternate reality, only it's not a fantasy. It's a nightmare, and we're just doing what we can to survive it with our principles intact. Now, before we imagine the above scenario of conservatives voting for Evan McMullin, we should answer the following question. What is the main reason conservatives who aren't Trumplicans will give for not voting for Evan McMullin? Or in other words, in other words, the conservatives. What will people like Douglas V. Gibbs, what reasons will they give for not voting for Evan McMullin? Well, it's that he has no chance of winning, and thus a vote for him would be a wasted vote, right? Well, most of the time, for most, if not all, of my adult voting life, I would have agreed with you. But what if we changed that mindset and began assuming that Evan McMullin does have a chance to win? Let's go back to that original scenario. If every Republican who isn't planning on voting for Trump starts working to help Evan McMullin win, it could give him a chance to win. Not a significant one, but this is the thought experiment, remember? If these Republicans joined his campaign and worked to convince moderate and conservative independents, particularly in swing states, that Evan McMullin represents their values and beliefs much more than Trump and Hillary do, then theoretically, if the race were close enough, it could steal enough votes from Hillary to toss the election to the House, and they would then have the opportunity to elect Evan McMullin as president, although they would elect Trump instead. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, is this far-fetched? Well, of course it is. Will it happen? No. But the idea of Trump being the GOP nominee was also extremely far-fetched, inconceivable, back in the summer of 2015 when he decided to run. And here we are. Of course, he had that 16-month head start. That does kind of help. Oh, and he also had the universal name recognition and fame and all that other rigmarole. Things that shouldn't matter, but they do. An idea remains unbelievable only until a critical mass of people start believing it. Then it becomes believable to the masses. And that's what happened with Trump's rise in the primaries. And with enough time, it could have happened with Evan McMullin's candidacy as well. Now, first, there are important reasons to vote for an independent conservative candidate in general. One, it would send a message to both parties that we want a conservative as president and that Trump does not represent us. Two, it would be a repudiation of Trump and the white national socialism that he stands for, or at least that he's adopted for this campaign. Three, it would tell the rest of the country that we don't think Hillary Clinton is fit to serve either, and that she does not have a mandate to extend Obama's failed liberal policies. Not that she would need one, or will need, not that she will need one. And four, it would show the rest of the country that there are still people of faith and principle left, and that we value our beliefs and principles more than we do political power that we will never attain by abandoning them. So why should conservatives vote for a candidate who best represents their values and principles rather than strategically? Well, McMullin isn't a spoiler. Rather, Trump is a spoiler for the conservative movement and of the conservative movement. Given that reality, it leads us to the most important question conservatives face in this election. How should we vote? Now, I disagree with the people on our side who say we need Hillary to win in a landslide. I believe the ideal election result would be that sweet spot between her just barely eking out a win and her destroying Trump big league. Well, why? Let's look at both scenarios. If she just barely wins, Trump and his supporters can and will incessantly bring up their conspiracy theory about the election being rigged, and it would be harder to refute them if she only wins by a small margin in the Electoral College and popular vote. She's not going to win those by small margins, so don't fret about that. Also, it would send a signal to the nation and the world that Trumpism, or some version of National Socialism, is still popular in America and is a belief that many Americans share, which is, again, why it's not going to be a close election. However, if she beats Trump in a landslide, that will be seen by many not just as a repudiation of Trump and what he represents, or purports to represent, but as a matter or a mandate to continue the big government communist policies that Obama has been pushing for 8 years. Now, notice I didn't say it will be a mandate. I said it will be seen as one. The media and the Democrats, pardon the redundancy, will work together to push the narrative that voters didn't just vote against Trump, they voted for Hillary and the communist policies and values she represents. But they can only get away with that successfully if she beats Trump by large margins in both the popular vote and in the Electoral College, as she's going to do. Now, the media and many Americans will be disappointed in Hillary if she fails after believing she had such a mandate given to her by them. By the way, the latter, the large margin of victory for President Hillary will set up her failure because it will encourage her to overreach. That's something to keep in mind. But they'll also be looking for someone or something else to blame as an excuse to save face for their naive belief in Hillary and the ability of the federal government in general. And that's why they'll blame Republicans in Congress, but then they always do, regardless, so what's new about that? Who will likely block many of her attempts to build on Obama's failed communist policies, especially if they retain both the House and the Senate. Of course, Republicans will get blamed no matter what, but the larger Hillary's victory over Trump is, the more of a contrast it will provide the media when they try to explain how Hillary's only failing because of Republican obstructionism. Yeah, well, what did that argument get the Dems in 2014 in the 2014 midterms? I wouldn't really sweat this part, folks. Will this hurt GOP chances of winning in 2020? Nah, I don't really think so. That's not the thing to worry about. The thing to worry about is will the Republican Party nominate a conservative for president ever again? Will the Republican Party even be a conservative party? That's the thing to worry about. That's why Cantanucci 04 believes it will be best if Hillary only wins by a more moderate margin like the ones Obama had against McCain and Romney. Well, yeah, that's as compared to a Mondale-style landslide. Well, rest easy, my son. Mondale magnitude, LBJ, Goldwater magnitude, Nixon McGovern magnitude landslides don't happen. A landslide in this day and age is a high single digits in the popular vote. 3 to 350 electoral votes. Yeah, that's what constitutes a landslide in this polarized era. So I don't think you have to worry, kid. So conservatives should not vote strategically, but on principle, because if we merely vote strategically, we get caught up in playing the political game. I mean, isn't this the same logic Trumplicans use when they try to scare us into voting for Trump? They say we have to vote for him to stop Hillary, even though supporting Trump is electing Hillary. He's supposedly the only one who can do it. No, he can't. Trump could never stop Hillary. Trump's only purpose in this election is to get Hillary elected. Well, now some conservatives are saying the same thing about Hillary, with the only difference being that their goal is to stop Trump, which is Trump stopping himself. No need to help him on that score. He can do it all just fine, all by himself. They say nobody else can do it, or that we need him to lose something big to send a message that his brand of National Socialism, misogyny, and racism doesn't represent America. Well, I get that. But again, this is the decapitate yourself to relieve yourself of your nose itch or your post-nasal drip. I mean, it's it's not it's not an actual, much less constructive solution. You see, it's not a solution at all. I mean, I understand the anger and frustration Trump has caused a lot of former conservatives, or maybe never conservatives in the first place, to have, but that's an argument based largely on fear, anger, emotion. In other words, it's foolishness. It's like Trump's arguments. If Trump doesn't lose big, the thinking goes, he'll try to delegitimize the results of the election and whip up his supporters into a frenzy, and widespread chaos and violence will ensue. Well, he's illegitimate himself, so he won't have much moral standing to delegitimize the election results. He's already whipped his supporters up into a frenzy, and yeah, widespread chaos and violence will ensue. But we know Trump will try to do that whether he loses by 1 point or 10. Either way, he'll claim it was rigged, and his supporters will be angry no matter what, because that's just what they do. And we'll be looking for an outlet for their frustrations, and which was supposed to be Trump, interestingly enough. Now, I don't believe there will be widespread, well, Cantanucci doesn't believe there will be widespread violence, because most Trumplicans are all bark and no bite. That's a good argument. Most of them are middle-aged or older, and because of that fact, I've said all along, I think after the election they will go back to watching Hannity and shaking their fists angrily at the TV, reveling in their irrelevance. There probably will be isolated incidents of violence, but again, I believe this will happen regardless of how badly Trump loses. The point is, we cannot give in to fear or base our votes entirely on what the results of the election may or may not be. And we know what it's going to be. Some of us always have. If all of us never Trump, aka actual, real, true conservatives, vote for Evan McMullin instead of Hillary, I can't imagine voting for Hillary. But then you remember that poll result we discussed a few days ago about how upwards of a sixth of self-identified conservatives are supporting Hillary to stop Trump. I mean, this is the level of insanity that this has reached. If true conservatives vote for Evan McMullin instead of Hillary Clinton, Trump will end up at the same low percentage in the popular vote. People will know that those votes aren't going to Trump, they're going to Evan McMullin. The message will be sent, especially if McMullin wins Utah. Trump is not one of us and does not represent our values and principles. Instead of giving in to fear, we should simply vote our conscience and leave the rest up to God. That's what faith is all about. Having confidence that God will make the best of a bad situation even when all hope appears to be lost and we can't imagine any good coming out of a situation. Boy, am I familiar with that particular construct. As Christians, this applies to our personal lives as well as political elections. We often make the mistake of trying to control the outcomes of situations about which we're scared. But we forget that most things in life are out of our control, which is a good thing, because that means God is in control, and He knows far better than we do what is best for our lives and ultimately our salvation. The more we try to control, in other words, the more we screw it up. But God's plan is never thwarted, brothers and sisters. If we have this kind of eternal perspective, we'll quickly realize that God is bigger than Trump, and that it's silly to think we can control the outcome of this election. There just aren't enough of us true conservatives in the country to do that. We're a minority group within a minority movement within a minority party, at least when it comes to presidential elections. But we can be at peace with the realization that if we vote the way our conscience tells us to, after we've developed and informed that conscience, we've done our part. The rest is in God's hands. So why are we more likely to see a conservative win in 2020 with Hillary Clinton as president than with Trump, notwithstanding the question of whether the GOP will ever nominate a conservative ever again? I mean, what would stop Trump from just running again in 2020? As I've told you before, people like Trump don't die young or prematurely. You know, Trump may have all manner of different strains of syphilis boiling through his body, but he's going to live to be 100. You know that. He'd probably run for president as a Republican every 4 years and always win the nomination, then always get blown out in the general. But let's be optimistic, like in the first segment, or like in the previous video. I believe, or rather Cantanucci believes, that Hillary won't be the, well, I agree with this too, I guess. I share this view, that Hillary Clinton will not be the communist heroine many in her base think, or at least hope she'll be. She's already unlikable. The more visible she is, the more she turns people off. And if she disappoints them even more than Obama, it will have a big depressive effect on Democrat turnout in 2020. I mean, this was the election. I mean, I'll guarantee you it's a subconscious thing. The party that usually loses and is headed for defeat in a presidential election, they pretty much know. They pretty much know whether they have a real shot or not. And they know that the candidate they're nominating, I mean, yeah, they go, yeah, they chant his name and his or her name. But they pretty much know. I mean, did Democrats really think that John Kerry was going to win in 2004? Did Democrats think that Al Gore was likely to win in 2000? Did Republicans really believe that Bob Dole was going to unseat Bill Clinton? And did any Republican think that John McCain was going to become the 44th president of the United States? No, not really. I mean, a lot of us convinced ourselves that Mitt Romney was really going to beat Barack Obama in 2012, even though none of the polls showed that. But we wanted to believe, and then we were crushingly disappointed on election night. So, Democrats coming into the 2016 cycle, especially after Hillary was the front runner, did they, and Elizabeth Warren didn't run, I mean, how many Democrats really believed that Hillary was going to win? I mean, this is the kind of year where you're probably going to win. You've had the White House for a couple of terms now, I mean, almost a decade. I mean, it's the pendulum swinging. It almost always does. And Democrat voters, they would never admit it, but if you pump them full of sodium pentothal and ask them, you didn't really expect to win this election with Hillary, did you? And they would say, no, not really. The only way that Hillary Clinton could win is what you dumbasses did in nominating Donald Trump. Donald Trump is putting Hillary Clinton in the White House. Hillary Clinton is a loser. Hillary Clinton is a Dukakis. Hillary Clinton is a Walter Mondale. Hillary Clinton is a John Kerry. Hillary Clinton is an Al Gore. She's a loser. She's only going to get elected because of Donald Trump. And imagine that woman trying to wield the bully pulpit with no charisma, no political skills. I mean, the bully pulpit is not going to work for her. That's just going to be the more. Remember, the more visible she is, the more disliked she becomes. And there's no great groundswell of trust in her as it is. She's not going to get a honeymoon. She's not going to get the benefit of the doubt, no matter how much the media tries to push her down our throats. And so by 2020, oh boy. I mean, we thought 2016 was unlosable. Democrats have no bench. All they got is Hillary Clinton. Elizabeth Warren didn't run. Julian Castro. I mean, she didn't even make Julian Castro a running mate. And Hillary Clinton, how can we possibly lose to Hillary Clinton? Well, the GOP always finds a way, I guess. But by 2020, I mean, you talk about a party that could spoil a wet dream. That's the GOP. But could even the GOP blow 2020 as well? Well, as Cantanucci goes on to say, the only reason Obama's approval rating is so high is because many Americans find him personally likable and relatable. No, that's not the reason why his approval rating is still so high. It's because it's in stark contrast to Trump and Hillary. Talked about that yesterday. Polls show they don't like Obama's policies and really don't like him all that much except by stark contrast. I mean, if you ever wanted the answer to the question, how could Barack Obama be made to look presidential, which he has not for 8 years, how could Barack Obama possibly be made to look presidential? Now we have our answer. Donald Trump. Well, with Hillary Clinton, any possibility of likability, without which the bully pulpit does not work, is taken away. This would create an environment ripe for a Republican win in 2020 if, capital I, capital F, GOP voters come to their senses and nominate a candidate who is both likable, competent, and actually a Republican. And God help us, a conservative. But how likely is that? If there's anything that we've learned in this cycle, is that we cannot take anything for granted. Because as it turned out, and as we learned, and as was exposed in this campaign, there were many enemies in our midst. Not just Trump. Trump just exploited them. But they were there. And now they've exposed themselves as enemies of conservatism. Hillary Clinton, I know you're not going to... I mean, she was an ideologue at one time, but she hasn't really been one for a long, for many, many years. Despite what talk radio has brainwashed many on the right into believing. Oh, sure, she's no centrist, but she doesn't care about communist policies and ideals as much as Obama does. For proof, just look at the video that was exposed by WikiLeaks, where she talks about how supporters of Bernie Sanders are unrealistic idealists and that they shouldn't expect everything on their communist agenda to get done with her in office. I mean, Hillary and Bill Clinton are two peas in a pod in that sense, the mercenary sense. They don't have any principles. They're just culturally liberal because they grew up in the age of the sexual revolution and were not given a foundation of faith and morals by their parents. There's one reason they've been able to make their marriage work all these years, despite Bill's horrible treatment of women and his lack of faithfulness to Hillary. They value power, influence, and wealth above all else. If they have to compromise and pass some bills that will piss off their base, as Bill Clinton did more than one occasion, that's fine with them. If you don't believe that Hillary isn't an ideologue, just read about her flip-flops on trade, immigration, and the Iraq War, just for starters. To those supporters of Trump who say electing Hillary will mean the end of our republic first of all, the republic ended 4 years ago with the re-election of Barack Obama, so we're not even talking about that. But to those Trumplicans who say electing Hillary will mean that the republic will never be resurrected, I say there's research suggesting this fear is unfounded. Well, Cantanucci is more of an optimist than I am. But especially if Republicans retain the House and the Senate. Think of maintaining Republican control of Congress over the next 4 years as being like a stasis chamber. that makes revival possible 4 years from now. That's the best metaphor I can come up with. Historically, total spending by the federal government is lower on average than when we have a Democrat president and a Congress controlled by Republicans than when we've had a Republican president with a Congress controlled by either Republicans or Democrats. One of Cantanucci's libertarian friends and former presidential candidate Austin Peterson points out in a video he put out, and the statistics backing up this claim can be found at the Cato Institute. Go to cato.org, do a Google search for the case for divided government. In other words, even if Trump were elected, there's no guarantee he would spend less than Hillary. In fact, he's trying to outbid her on infrastructure spending. Stimulus, in other words. I mean, we know already he wants to spend more than her on infrastructure and won't reform entitlements. So conservatives can actually make a solid case that having Hillary as president instead of Trump would be better for the economy in the long term. Or at least they'd be equally bad as long as Republicans keep at least the House and hopefully the Senate as well. Plus, a Trumpetency would be worse for the conservative movement in the long term, as has been explained in this video and countless other videos on this conservative Ronin playlist, and thus ultimately worse for the country. I mean, think about it. It's easier to unify against the left when the left controls the White House, because there can be no Republican fingerprints on left-wing policies. Donald Trump is not a conservative. Donald Trump is a New York liberal Democrat. Once in office, a President Trump would make deals with Democrats. And because he was the head of the Republican Party, a lot of congressional Republicans would just go right along. They can't oppose the leader of our party, even when he's pursuing the opposition's agenda. And thus, conservatism is further destroyed, further compromised, further eradicated, annihilated, eviscerated, self-eviscerated. You know, that's why I say the enemy within is more dangerous than the enemy without, because outside the gate, because you can see that enemy. You know that's the enemy. You recognize that as the enemy. You see them coming. You know who they are. You know what they are. You know to oppose them. You know to fight them. The enemy within, on the other hand, sows confusion, sows division, and only advances the agenda of the enemy. Yet, and this really should be indicative, this really should be telltale, Trump and his supporters spend more time attacking Republicans than they do Hillary. And are even talking about not voting for down-ballot Republicans, which only helps Hillary. They've exposed themselves as phonies who don't believe their own words, or are so incompetent they don't understand the consequences of what they're doing. If Hillary Clinton would destroy this country, or will destroy this country, then the only thing that could possibly stand in her way is a Congress controlled by Republicans. If you only vote for Trump and don't vote for Republican members of Congress, then according to your own words and logic, you are ensuring the destruction of America. But it's no surprise that Trumplicans are making arguments based on anger and emotion rather than logic and reason and principle. If Republicans hold both houses of Congress, which is still very possible, there will be great gridlock and stalemate for the next 4 years with Hillary as president, just as there was with Obama. This, when added with her lack of personal charm and charisma, will drop her approval rating even lower. The elation of beating Trump will give way to cynicism among the electorate created by Hillary's broken promises and high expectations not being met. Furthermore, as is pointed out in an article at the Daily Beast entitled "Trump Will Go Away, but the Anger He Stirred Up is Just Getting Started," a majority of Americans are still against intrusive big government policies in general, or at least some of them think they are. And after 12 long years of such failed policies, they will be begging for a change in 2020 if only the GOP will give them one. But as we know, presidential elections are mostly popularity or beauty contests. Have been for, what is it now, 56 years? So Americans will only vote for change if it's presented to them by a candidate they like, can relate to, and trust, because only in those circumstances will they be open to persuasion. And that gets back to, as we talked about in the previous video, about sunny, optimistic, positive, Reagan-esque conservatism, not anger and threats and insults and put-downs and negativity. Positivity was the case in 1992 with Bill Clinton. Yeah, it was a con job, but he was real good at it. And in 2008, well, not 2012, but in 2008 with Barack Obama, hope and change. If Republicans were to nominate a competent, charismatic, and articulate conservative in 2020 who could efficiently and clearly explain why conservative policies have done and will do more to help poor people especially, but people of all incomes, religions, races, and walks of life, then I believe we would have a conservative president in 2021. But is that even still possible after the damage done to the Republican Party by Trump mania? And Trump mania is not going to end. The divisions, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put the GOP back together again. Will that even be possible? I want to believe it is. But is it? Is it? Well, we will do all that we can to make that become a reality. Right over the top of you Trumplicans and conservatives. That battle starts now when we can do our part as soldiers of the conservative movement by opposing Trump and Hillary and voting for a candidate we can believe in, Evan McMullin. Part 2. Why it's important that conservatives have a candidate they can proudly vote for rather than a candidate who only represents what they're voting against. Now, we've just described the scenarios that we face as conservatives going into the voting booth on November 8th, which is a metaphor because nobody votes in voting booths anymore, but work with me. No matter what we do, it's practically inevitable at this point that Hillary Clinton will be our next president, barring something inconceivable. Now, we made the case that although it's tempting to vote, well, it's not, I don't see how it could be tempting to vote for Hillary Clinton, to make sure Trump is defeated as soundly as possible, we should not give in to that temptation. Why would it even occur to you? You can't stop one New York liberal with another New York liberal. You're still getting a New York liberal either way. Well, here we hope to persuade our fellow conservatives. Well, actual conservatives don't need this persuading, so I guess we're talking about persuading Trumplicans and conservatives, that there's a stronger argument to be made that voting for an independent conservative candidate like Evan McMullin will be better for the conservative movement and the country long term than voting for Hillary to stop Trump or Trump to stop Hillary. Especially since voting for Trump isn't going to stop Hillary. Now, if every conservative who's against Trump voted for Hillary in order to stop Trump or vice versa, what was the point of being an independent conservative like Evan McMullin running in the first place? Many objected to him running and said it was pointless because he had no name ID, but even if he was a famous conservative, that wouldn't change the above line of argument that says Hillary is the only option to stop Trump and vice versa, thus making the name ID argument invalid. It's not enough just to vote against Trump or against Hillary. As Christians and conservatives, we must have a leader who we can vote for, who we can point to as a person who represents our values, beliefs, and principles. Remember the last time that was really fully, entirely the case? Ronald Reagan. We must have a moral and intellectual representation of who we are as a movement, or otherwise we'll just be seen as reactionaries who were disgusted with Trump but didn't have the balls or the vision to present a credible and realistic conservative alternative to him. In other words, it's not enough to be against something. You have to lay out what you are for. Who are you? What do you stand for? It's the difference between conservatism and tribalism. You know, why do you stand where you stand? Why are you a Republican? Why are you a conservative? What is conservatism? And you explain it, and the best way to explain that in an electoral context is to nominate a candidate who shares those values and can articulate them on our behalf. This is what we stand for. Evan McMullin embodies what we stand for. Donald Trump sure as hell doesn't. By having a leader like Evan McMullin who will stand with us and for us, we'll not only have someone to point to when people ask how we're stopping Trump or Hillary, we'll have the leader of a new conservative movement. The split Trump has created both within the GOP and the conservative movement as a whole has left a void, one that will be left empty if we all just vote for Hillary or vote for Trump instead of Evan McMullin. It's dangerous and ultimately damaging to our cause to leave such a void because inevitably, well, it's a rule of physics. A void is inevitably filled with something. In this case, either by National Socialists or by communists or big government Republicans who don't represent us or our beliefs, or just Democrat light, not to be redundant. I mean, there's some who would argue, well, that's how the GOP ended up being taken over by Trump in the first place. Conservatives should vote for Evan McMullin because he fills that void. He stepped up to the plate and made the sacrifice of running an honorable campaign in this chaotic environment. He's shown that he's fit to be president and has conducted himself with honor, integrity, and truthfulness. Traits that are nowhere else in evidence in this election cycle. For that and the reasons described above, he should be rewarded with our votes. Furthermore, a conservative with an optimistic and inclusive vision, both for the movement and for the country, can attract, in classic Reagan-esque fashion, women, young people, minorities into the tent. Not move the tent in their direction. Welcome them into the tent. Get them to move right. All the groups Trump is alienating to Hillary Clinton in droves. Right now, they're politically homeless because neither party really represents them or is giving them good solutions to the problems they face. We need to get their attention and show them that there are such solutions. And we've been talking about and fighting for them for decades, even if most Americans aren't aware of that. We have to look beyond 2016 and have a long-term vision of our movement, because this is about more than just one election, and it always has been. It's about defining who we are as Christians and conservatives and Americans, and about how we can create more conservatives and add people to our movement, not move toward them, welcome them and lure them toward us, without turning people off or diluting our principles, as Trump has deliberately done in the biggest act of false flag sabotage in American political history. The grassroots activists are crucial in this fight, but we need a leader to represent us. Evan McMullin is that leader, and he can and already is attracting the groups mentioned above. Conservative movement's problems go far beyond Trump. We have to decide what kind of movement we want to be. Do we want to be inspirational, optimistic, inclusive, decent, compassionate, and open-minded? In other words, Reagan-esque? Or do we want to be reactionary, crude, dumb, angry, closed-minded, and isolated, and extremist, and, in other words, not conservative? Do we want more of phony conservative entertainers like Sean Hannity? Or more of principled and thoughtful conservative talk show hosts like Charlie Sykes? This is the choice that we face going forward, and it has nothing to do with Trump. Who will be long gone? Well, or not. Don't forget Trump TV. Why do you think he's firing that up? It's to keep the right divided. And after Trump loses this election, will he be long gone? I doubt that. I don't know if he'll run again in 2020, but he's not going away. Look at all the additional suckers he found. He's not just going to let them go. Let those people go. He's going to keep them on the hook, man. People who make this all about Trump on both sides of the debate are missing the forest for the trees. Trump is merely a symptom of the moral rot that's been eating away at our culture for decades. This is about being honest about the problems our country faces and applying conservative values and principles to them. Our primary goal in politics should not be to win election. Well, I don't know if I can. No, that's not accurate. I mean, he says our primary goal in politics should be to help people and make the country a better place to live. But winning elections is how you do that. You can't do that unless you win elections enough to actually get into power and apply conservative principles and ideas to the problems of early 21st century America. But it is true that if we win the culture wars as a result of doing that, then great, but that should be, no, it's not secondary. But then winning elections is a key in that, but turning the culture around is beyond the realm of politics. Which I think is what Cantanucci was saying, or attempting to say. He just didn't do a very good job of it. Trump would be worse for the conservative movement than Hillary for many reasons, some of which we've already described. He would be like a less competent version of Nixon. I've used that analogy before on this channel. Conservatives voted for Nixon in 2 elections despite the fact that he was not a conservative. He was left of center. He just had the reputation of being conservative because of his long-term and well-established anti-communist stance. Hence, only Nixon could go to China, that kind of thing. But he was left of center, make no mistake about it. Nixon's actions and policies as president confirmed that. This led many Americans to start being cynical and not trusting their government, and for good reason. But it also led many of them to start thinking Nixon represented, here we go, all Republicans and conservatives. Nixon is what brought us Jimmy Carter, ladies and gentlemen. As a result of this, after Gerald Ford replaced him as president, Ford lost to Carter, a very liberal candidate who took the country to the far left. If Nixon had stayed in power, there's little doubt that Carter would have defeated whoever the Republicans put up in 1976. Yet, this ended up being a good thing in the long run because Carter was grossly incompetent as president and was so blinded by his communist ideology that he failed to see how disastrous it was for the country. This caused many Americans to wake up to the reality that conservative policies work and communist policies do not. And when Reagan presented them with bold colors, not pale pastels, they elected him in a landslide. If Trump is our Nixon, Hillary is our Jimmy Carter. She'll try to ram down our throats at least some of the same failed communist policies he did. And I believe if we nominate another Reagan, or the closest thing we can get to him, we'll have the same result in 2020 as we had in 1980, a landslide victory. But that requires that the Republican Party still be the conservative party. It requires the Republican Party to actually nominate a conservative. It requires the Republican Party to abandon anger and accept reality and return to its Reagan-esque roots. Not just ideologically, but temperamentally as well. In order for that to happen, we need to start rebuilding the conservative movement from the ruins in which Trump has left it. And we can't do that without a leader, and we can't do it without a plan. We need to start forming relationships with minorities and groups all over the country who've never been reached out to by Republicans before. We need to show them what positive change in their communities can look like. Beyond that, we have to create a policy agenda that will act as a credible alternative to Hillary Clinton's communist policies. I'm sure we'll have our disagreements over what the pieces of that agenda should be, and that's probably why we'll never end up producing one. But we need to come to some sort of consensus about them and then present it to the American people. I mean, think of Newt Gingrich's contract with America only presented by someone without Newt's baggage. Then we have to support our members of Congress who will try to get as many pieces of that agenda passed as possible, only to be vetoed by Mrs. Clinton, of course. They will fail many times because of Democrats' efforts to block them, as well as Hillary's vetoes, but they need to make every effort to pass them, and if they do, we should do our part to support them every step of the way. In other words, the Carolina Panthers last season had a rallying cry. In fact, they had this gigantic bass drum at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina. And on it, it said in Carolina colors, in black with teal lettering, it said, "Keep pounding." And before every Carolina Panthers home game, boom, 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 keep pounding. Ah! I know it's not particularly clever expression. I like the Seahawks louder, faster, stronger. How did I go? Better, faster, louder, stronger. How did I go? Better, faster, stronger, louder, better than you, bigger, faster, stronger, better than you. Well, anyway, you get the idea. That's what Republicans have to do. That's what conservatives have to do. That's what we've always had to do. That's how this process works. You keep pounding. You keep pushing. You do the best you can. You get the most you can. And then you come back for more. You don't have unrealistic expectations. You don't have this idea that, yeah, we can make the Democrat Senate majority pass an Obamacare defunding bill, and then we can force Barack Obama to sign it into law, because that's bullshit. You can't do it. You have to keep pounding. Get what you can get, and what you can't get, you make campaign issues in the next election. And then you get the Senate back, like the GOP did in 2014. And then you keep pounding. And whatever you can't get, you get what you can, and what you can't get, you make campaign issues for 2016, and you nominate a conservative candidate as your presidential nominee. And then you keep pounding. Win the election. Then you can get all kinds of things done. And what you can't get then, you keep pounding. You don't give up. You don't start burning down your own side. You don't engage in mass fratricide. You keep pounding, and you remember who the enemy really is. We also have to recruit new people into the conservative movement, including as many millennials as possible, so that they can reach out to their peers and bring more young people with them. Young people, millennials, have been alienated, driven out of and away from the GOP in droves because of Donald Trump. You think that was any accident? GOP has done a terrible job marketing their brand to young people, and now their brand is Trump. And because it's mostly made up of old white guys who don't have a clue what it's like to be a young conservative in today's environment. You think that maybe Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio or Scott Walker could have made some inroads in that direction? We need to have people within the movement work to branch out into entertainment, sports, academia, media. In other words, the left's march, a counter march to the left's march through America's societal institutions, so that we can at least start to chip away at the monopoly Democrats have on those areas of our society. Liberals have used their dominance in the broader culture to help them win presidential elections. Remember, politics is downstream from culture. We simply cannot cede that ground to them any longer. But then we ceded the Republican Party to them now. These are just some of the things that conservatives need to do to start preparing ourselves for the fight that awaits us in the next election, and the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that. And to create the best possible environment for a conservative to win in 2020. But before that, the best possible environment for a conservative to be nominated in 2020. Immediately after November 8th, we need to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, roll up our sleeves, and get to work, not just on rebuilding our movement, but on rebuilding our families, our churches, our communities. After all, those things are the backbone of our society, and as they go, so goes the country. Or at least that's the way it's supposed to work. It will help a great deal if we have men and women like Evan McMullin and Mindy Finn to lead us in this battle for the soul of our nation, or to take back the soul of our nation, to take back our party, and then take back the country, and work with us in the rebuilding effort. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I, a baby boomer, and my children, who are millennials, will be voting for Evan McMullin on November 8th. And I strongly urge any remaining surviving true conservatives to do likewise. And you know what? All you Trumplicans and cuckservatives should do so as well.